Hello and welcome to this first podcast for the module Working 9 to 5, the Business of Gender and Country Music. Now this module, as you'll find out, looks at the issue of gender as it relates to the genre of American country music. We will particularly focus on three key decades in the history of country music throughout this module, the 1960s, the 1980s and the 2010s. For a detailed guide on how we'll approach the learning activities in the module, then see the module handbook, which is on the site on Blackboard. Now, you'll next listen to three podcasts after this one, and each of those podcasts will introduce a different iconic female artist in the genre of country music, one of them from each of the decades that I just mentioned, so one from the 60s, one from the 80s, one from the 2010s. And the women in these podcasts have each achieved notable success in country music, but this success has not been down to the musical talent they have alone. In each case, there were other elements that impacted on their success, and that is of course the point of this module, to look at how those issues relate to the success or lack of success of women in country music. Now, perhaps these women were strong business people. They had a way into the music business through a relative or a friend, or they made some sacrifice in another area of their personal or professional life in order to become as successful as they were and to have the longevity that they've had. However, the focus of this podcast, the first podcast, is your summative assessment 1 for this module, that includes the project-based approach that we would like you to take for this work throughout the other learning activities and the rest of the module. So I'm going to introduce the project-based approach, tell you a little bit about that, what it is all about. As I say, there's further information in the module guide if you need it. But just before we talk more about the project-based approach, I wanted to give you a brief overview of a task that you should be completing this week. So the work you should be doing this week with the three artist podcasts. So once you've listened to this one, this podcast, the first one, and you know more about the project-based approach, you can then have an opportunity to use that project-based approach and try it out when listening to the other three podcasts and conducting also your own independent research. You should already have read the handout for this week, which introduces you to the learning task, made that available for you on the module site. You should listen to the 4 podcasts, this one included, of course. You're doing that now, so well done. And make some notes of your own and consider your response to the 3 key questions that we've already described in the module guide. These questions will be really important throughout the rest of the module as well, and they are: to what extent do you feel that gender has played a role in the success of this particular artist, whoever it might be? What makes you think that? Would the path to success be easier or harder if that artist were of the opposite gender? So, if they were a man, would they have the same kind of issues, or would it be easier or harder for them to succeed? Second question, to what extent does the artist in question use gender to their advantage? How do they do this, and why do they do it? And finally, to what extent do you agree with the idea that most female artists in country music have to maintain other business or creative interests alongside their musical career in order to remain successful and relevant? So those are the 3 questions. They're on the handout as well, and that's what you should be looking at and thinking about when you're listening to these 3 podcasts. Now, after you've watched and responded to all 3 podcasts, you should then conduct your own independent research based on what you've learned from the 3 artists. You should identify your own artist, not one covered in the podcast. Of course, it should be a female country music artist, and you should prepare some brief notes as to why you think they would be a suitable candidate to focus on for the summative assessment. More on the summative assessment in a moment. We'll discuss your responses to these 3 podcasts, plus your own independent research and your choice of artist in the seminar this week. Don't forget, there are some key texts you should be looking at, referring to throughout your research. They're good starting points to jump off from. The texts important at the moment probably are Dolly Parton, Gender and Country Music by Lee H. Edwards. That's Indiana University Press. Finding Her Voice, Women in Country Music from 1800 to 2000 by Robert K. Owerman and Mary A. Buffwack. Vanderbilt Press for that one. A Boy Named Sue, Gender and Country Music by Christine M. McCusker and Diane Peckold. And finally, The Women of Country Music, a Reader by Charles K. Wolfe and James E. Ackerson, and that's University of Kentucky Press. Okay, so to introduce the first summative assessment, the first summative assessment in this module requires you to work in small groups with other students in the class and identify and promote one female artist in country music that you feel is worthy of being named Female Icon in Country Music. That's an award that will be given, theoretically, of course, by the CRS. Now, the CRS is a country music radio seminar. It's a 3-day event of educational programming featuring panels of key business leaders in various fields, presentations on new technology, business practices, personal career development tasks. It's basically an industry showcase and kind of a corporate event over 3 days in Nashville for the radio industry, basically. Each year, the CRS also holds an evening of awards as part of the conference, and for your summative assessment, this first assessment task, you should identify and argue the case for one female artist in your group who you feel would be worthy of being named the Female Icon in Country Music. That's an award that we've introduced that will be given out by the CRS this year. It's a brand new award. You can choose to deliver your presentation in any way you like. You can do a straight presentation, you can do a poster design, you can talk about that, or you can do a role play. Regardless of whatever you take in terms of your approach, you need to give a short presentation of around 10 minutes on your chosen artist, talking about your research, why you've done it in the way you've done it, and that will be in front of a group of tutors, myself and some others from this module who'll be acting as the board of the CRS. We'll be playing that role for your assessment. Okay, you'll also be required to submit a summary of your research on the submission point on Blackboard. So that should be your poster if you've done it, or a copy of the slides if you do a presentation. You should also ensure, of course, you refer to the learning activities you will complete through the rest of the module. You should, of course, bring your argument back to the key ideas about gender in country music and the questions I've already mentioned. And also the learning objectives for the summative assessment, which again is in the module handbook. So finally then, for this first podcast, let me talk a little bit about the project-based approach. The project-based approach was developed by Aaron Sams. He is one of the co-creators of the flipped classroom. You'll know about a flipped classroom approach. That's the approach we're taking right now, where to listen to some podcasts, to involve yourself in something outside the classroom before you come along for the seminar. After developing the flipped classroom approach, Aaron moved on to think about the project-based approach to learning. And he describes this as the project being not the dessert of your studies, but the main course. So the project that you're going to do for your summative assessment is the most important thing, and you're going to learn while you work on it. So the project-based approach means that I'm introducing now at the start of the module your summative assessment. You've got a number of weeks of learning to do. You haven't really learned anything in this module yet, but as you go along, you're going to learn and always have that project in your mind, in the back of your mind. The artist you're going to focus on, your project is going to be there, and you're going to learn things, and you're going to always associate them with your final assessment and be thinking about what you're going to do and how these learning activities are going to relate to the artist you want to focus on. So in the face-to-face element of this week's task, you've been asked to attend the seminar with an idea of which artist you want to focus on for this assessment to kickstart the project-based approach. We'll discuss each of the artist's podcasts and your responses to them. And you should post your responses, by the way, on the videos themselves, on the links that we've got in the help sheet for this week. And we'll talk about your responses to the questions. We'll also then talk about your choice of independent artist based on your research, and we'll try and pair you up with other similar students in the class who have similar ideas and kind of similar artists. Obviously, in the end, you're only going to have one artist to focus on as a group, but it'll be up to you to make the decision about those points. So that's it for this first podcast. Do go ahead now and listen to the other 3. They're slightly shorter. They cover 3 artists from the 60s, 80s and the 2010s.